Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Laguna Art Museum. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really have a wonderful privilege of welcoming Violins of Hope to the museum. I'm Robin Rundle. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator, and it's programs like this that are really special to us, that extend into the community and bring people in and through. So again, thank you so much. It's really a privilege, and I'm handing off to Chloe from the Philharmonic Society of Orange County.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Like Robin said, thank you. I'm Chloe Hopper, and I am the Education Associate and Coordinator for our Youth Symphony at the Philharmonic Society of Orange County. The Philharmonic Society is honored to share Violins of Hope, a powerful tribute to the victims and survivors of the Holocaust, told through the violins once played by Jewish musicians before and during this time. These instruments, silent witnesses to both suffering and strength, now speak again, through music. Since last week and continuing through June 10th, the Philharmonic Society of Orange County has been presenting concerts and community events around this extraordinary collection. We have over 60 of them here in Orange County, and we thank all of our sponsors and partners, particularly the Laguna Art Museum team, for hosting us in this beautiful space with this candlelight. It's perfect, right? Performing today are the very talented young musicians from the Antarctic Ensemble, featuring some of the members of our very own Orange County Youth Symphony. Today we'll be able to hear stories in the voices of a total of 6 violins, a viola, and a cello. This performance holds a special meaning for OCYS because our members, just this past June, were able to go to Dachau and the Jewish ghettos of Prague last year while we were on tour in Europe. So that journey has deepened their understanding in history and remembrance while playing these instruments. We have the privilege to be in the presence of Avshi Weinstein today, co-founder of Violins of Hope, who has toured these instruments all over the world for many years. Thank you all for coming to remember, reflect, and carry these voices forward. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing Avshi Weinstein.
Too many superlatives in one sentence, but I hope I can get up to it. So, we start with a bet. Who thinks that none of these candles are going to be broken by the end of the year? I'm betting against, but I'll tell you a little bit about the instruments that you're going to hear, a little bit about our project. We'll have time for Q&A in the end, if you'd like. So let's start with the first 2 violins. About 2 years ago, we did a project in South Carolina, running around all the states from place to place. And one of the people there, his name is Pastor Chris Edmonds. Probably you have no idea who I'm talking about. But his father was a Sergeant Major Chris Edmonds, Master Sergeant, actually. Rudy Edmonds, sorry, I'm bad with names. He was a US soldier, and he was fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, and unfortunately became a POW with many, many other people. In the camp that he was, and like in many, many other places, the Nazis separated the Jewish POWs from the other Christian POWs. So the head of the camp came to him one day, said, tomorrow morning, during roll call, all the Jewish people from the unit will step forward. We're talking about, give or take, 250 Jewish people from about 1,200. And you'll give them to me, and that is that. Morning comes, one call comes, everybody stands out. The guy comes to him and says, okay, give me all the Jews in the unit. He said no. The commander took his gun out, put it to Rudy's head, said, give me all the Jews in the unit, or I'm going to kill you. He said no. He said, today we are all Jews. And even under the threat of being shot on the spot, and the Nazis did that all the time, he never surrendered anyone, saving about 250 Jewish soldiers. like many, many, many other people, he never ever talked about it. His son had no idea what his father did. Until there was an interview with one of those Jewish soldiers, I think it was in around 2000, whatever, and he spoke about it in the newspaper. His son learned about it, and the story came out. Now, the fun part was when the American army started advancing, they had to clear out the camp and march them further into Germany. So there was the British camp and the French camp and the American camp, and everybody was marching out, and Woody Allen said, "We're not going to go anywhere. We're staying right here." So the Nazis left, they stayed, and about a few hours later, the American soldiers came in and released them. So the violin that we have here, this is an American-made violin around 1890-something, made in New Jersey, the same area where Woody Edmonds was shipped to Europe, and it is dedicated to his memory. Now, the other violin that we have is this very beautiful violin with the inlaid Star of David. This is originally done. These instruments were done in an area called Schönbach. It's the border between Germany and the Czech Republic. It really depends on which day of the week you're talking, then you know which country it was. It's all the time changing. These are very, very simple instruments. These were done by the thousands. They used to sell them here in Sears in 1900 for about $5. So just imagine how much it actually costs back then. These instruments, most of them, we don't know their history, so we dedicate them to different people and different events during the war. This violin that you've just seen is dedicated to the mass killing in Babi Yar in the Ukraine, where in about 3 or 4 days they killed over 80,000 Jewish people by shooting them in the woods. This is the beginning after the invasion of Russia in June, July 1941. Now, the viola and cello, both of them are made in Germany. These are instruments my grandfather bought from people in Palestine, in Israel, just after the war. When survivors started coming, telling about all the atrocities, there was a very strong there was very strong boycott on everything German, including musical instruments. The Palestine Orchestra, what is today the Israeli Philharmonic, many of the musicians were coming from Germany and Austria. They had really very good German instruments. They didn't want to play them anymore. Many came to my grandfather, sold him the instruments. My grandfather knew he cannot sell these back because if nobody wants to buy anything made in Germany, how can you sell something made in Germany? He knew that he lost all his family. He was one of 11 brothers and sisters. Only one of his brothers survived. My grandmother had 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. None of her family survived. So my grandfather bought whatever he could, really beautiful, excellent German-made instruments, which were basically worthless in Israel. Until many years later, in 91, we had an apprentice coming from Dresden, Germany, and he saw those instruments and asked my father to give a lecture in Germany to the German Violin and Bow Making Association about those instruments, how they traveled to Israel, what happened to them. And this was basically the first lecture of what today is Violins of Hope. So, some music, and then we'll have some more stories. instruments. I'll tell you a short story about Dachau. In 2006, we did a concert in Paris, and the honorary speaker was a person named Jorge Sampun. Anyone knows who Jorge Sampun was? He was one of the education ministers in Spain after Franco, and he came on stage, he had his speech ready, and then he said, you know what, leave the speech, I'll tell you a story. Spain sent many political prisoners to Nazi Germany. Many of them were sent to Dachau and Buchenwald, and Sambrun was one of them. He was sent to Dachau for a long time, and he said that Sundays, he was Christian, so it was a bit different. He said that Sundays were their days off, and one time he went there with some friends. They were looking around the storage, and they found this violin, and he said his friend took out the violin, started playing, and this was the only time that he was in Dachau and he felt like a kind of a human being. Now the two other violins that we are going to hear now, this violin is dedicated to my great-grandfather, Yaakov Weinstein. My great-grandfather, like many others, was a rabbi, and he didn't believe that you should go to Israel before the Messiah coming. So he stayed behind with many of his kids, my uncles and aunts. And after the war started, my grandfather was a very enthusiastic Zionist. He believed that Jews should live in Israel. So he immigrated as soon as he could in 1938. And we have a suitcase full of letters from all his brothers and sisters and my grandmothers, begging them to try and get certificates from the British to come to Israel. The British were really nice, they always said no. And unfortunately, none of them could come. The other violin is dedicated to a brother and sister named Bunia and Wolf Rabinovich. None of you have met my father. My father loved collecting things. Many different things. One of the books my father bought once is a book which has probably most of the musical and theatrical programs which were done in the Vilna ghetto. It's about this thick. Not a joke, it's a very big book. Almost every single day they had a concert, a theater, something in Vilna. Like in many other ghettos, they tried to have as much music as they could, to try to give them some kind of human life. There were two kids who were mentioned in many of the programs playing solo, Bunia and Wolf Rabinovich. We don't know what happened to them. Most probably they died. When, where, how, unfortunately we will never know. So my father dedicated that violin to the brother and sister. So more music and then more talking.
Can I go?
my mother's side of the family. I don't know if any of you seen a movie called Defiance with Daniel Craig, Liv Schreiber, and Jamie Bell. Who saw the movie? I saw you guys saying yes. You remember the movie? Yeah? It's talking about basically 4 brothers who lived in what today is Belarus, then it was Eastern Poland. And unlike many other Jewish people, instead of going to the ghettos, they decided to live in the woods as partisans. This was my grandfather and his 3 brothers. And let me destroy one scene from the movie. If you remember the movie, there was a scene of a wedding. This is supposed to be my grandparents' wedding. So let's say it really didn't happen exactly. So the actual story is a bit different. My grandfather was coming again from a small Jewish family of about 11 brothers and sisters. My grandmother was the youngest of 12. They lived in nearby villages, so they knew each other before the war. Some of my aunts and uncles got married. Some moved here. Some moved to Argentina, to other places. So if you want to know, yes, I have a huge family in the United States. Nobody knows everybody. Except of my late grandmother, who was actually in very good terms with everyone. Nobody actually knows everybody. And the actual story is that my grandfather was in love with my grandmother before the war, but she was a young, spoiled Jewish girl, and she didn't want to marry a village boy. When the war started, they had a deal, and the deal was that if he's going to save her and her parents, she would marry him. So my grandfather made his part. He actually gave my grandmother a gun when they got married, which was one of the most important things you could have in the woods. They saved in the end 1,232 Jewish people. They were freed in July 1944 by the Russians, who were actually on the good side in those times. And unfortunately, my grandfather was drafted into the Russian army. A few months later, my grandmother heard that he died. We don't know when and where. And when the war finished, my mother was born almost a month before the end of the war. My grandmother took my mother and her parents and somehow made it to Western Germany. And 2 years later, almost, she arrived to Israel, where she stayed basically for the rest of her life. Now, I managed to talk to someone who served with my grandfather in the Russian army, but he didn't want to tell me what happened. Unfortunately, when I talked to him, he was probably either 90 or very close to that. It's been a while, so I don't think he is alive, so unfortunately, we will probably never know what happened. Now, the last 2 violins that we're going to hear, this is another instrument that my grandfather bought from people from the Philharmonic Orchestra. This violin was made in 1774, approximately, in Germany, by a German violin maker called Benedict Wagner, nothing to do with the composer Wagner. But as you can imagine, yeah, I'll release you guys in a few minutes. As you can imagine, people didn't really want to do anything with anything touching Germany. Someone was calling for Kurt Wagner. It was even worse. This violin belonged to a guy named Erich Wieninger. He was born and raised in Vienna. He was a butcher and an amateur violinist. And when Austria was taken by the Nazis in 1938, he was arrested a few times. His father was arrested and killed by a certain police officer. Erich wanted to kill that police officer. He knew who it was. But he himself was arrested. He was sent to Dachau and Buchenwald. And he was a part of a music group there who played for the inmates, especially on Sundays. And again, this is before the beginning of the war. And his sister, she was married to a Quaker and somehow managed to get him released. The Nazis told him, take your things, leave Europe, never come back here again. Somehow we managed to get to an illegal immigrant boat going to Israel. The boat was breaking down all the time. After 3 months almost, they arrived to Israel, Immediately, of course, arrested by the British. He was sent to Mauritius, to a jail. He had another group there in the jail, and this is where he survived the war. Now, in 1945, when the war was over, the American President Truman forced the British government to take all the people they expelled during the war and let them go into Palestine. And this is how he arrived to Israel. And this violin was with him the whole time. Anyone has any questions? So, everybody wants to know what you play.
So our first piece, our first set was the two Jewish pieces. Oh, okay. I'm Caden. I'm 17 years old. I'm about to graduate high school. And major in violin performance. Conservatory of Music and classic language.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben. I'm a first year violin performance major at UCI.
My name is Grace, and I'm a first year piano performance at UCI.
Hello, I'm Ezekiel. I'm going into my third year and transferring to Long Beach for cello performance and composition.
So our first set of pieces was two Jewish folk tunes. One titled Fox Dance and the other titled Murosetsky Keringos. Our second piece was The Man I Love, which is a Gershwin short tune. And our third piece was Por una Cabeza by Carlos Gardel.